Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to give an update about Luna and its current risk level. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter, where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. So if you've been following the markets, you'll probably have noticed that one of the assets that's been doing surprisingly well, maybe not so surprisingly well, it's just been doing incredibly well during this more recent downturn has been Luna. Luna has corrected, to be sure, you can see it here on the price chart, but it's still way up since even late November, and now it's going to the moon. It's setting new all-time highs as we speak. So what I'm showing you here is our risk indicator, and I'm showing you the price history of Luna across time. So each dot here is a day, and each day is color-coded based on the output of our risk indicator, the upside downside potential indicator, or UDPI. So a score of 5 is high risk, a score of -5 is low risk. And what we can see is that, Luna has been on kind of this crazy run ever since the summer. It had corrected coming off of the spring, really launched during the summer, and then kind of increasing slowly ever since. And now we seem to be hitting that next leg up, kind of this next big parabolic run potentially going on for Luna. And I think what's interesting to note is if you just look at where we kind of stand right now relative to the color coding based on the risk level, we're not in super scary territory yet, right? We're not in the red or the deep red, which has tended to coincide with the end of these big kind of parabolic moves that Luna has done before. And this might suggest that there's still upside potential left for Luna, that it has maybe has a lot of momentum in it right now, and it's really going to be moving to the upside. And so I think we can kind of see a little bit more clearly what's going on if we just look at the raw output of the risk indicator across time. So that's what this is here. This is the UDPI level, with 5 being high risk, -5 being low risk. And what we can see is that after putting in this huge run coming out of the summer, risk had fallen quite substantially, even as price had kind of gone sideways and a little bit up. And then really what seems to happen is the risk kind of bounced off of zero, and now we're off to the races. Now we're really starting to shoot up to the upside. And I think there's some interesting things to think about with Luna, about why maybe it's doing so well in these current market conditions. One of the things about Luna that's important to keep in mind is just the utility that provides, and the utility it provides that might be especially appealing to people during downtrends, during kind of bear markets. So one of the big things that attracts people to Luna is the stablecoin that's on their platform, UST. There are platforms on Luna that allow you to stake UST and earn pretty impressive interest, pretty impressive returns. Like Anchor Protocol is about 20% APY just off of UST, and that's of course very attractive because UST being staked or pegged to the US dollar, there's not really any downside of just holding onto that asset. And so if you're earning 20% just for holding it during a bear market, that's quite appealing. And so in this more recent correction where people got quite fearful and maybe people thought we were going into an extended bear market, it makes sense that people would then shift maybe a lot of their funds to something like Luna Protocol and UST to use some of those platforms. And so all that kind of interest in Luna might have ended up being kind of part of the reason why its price has held up so well, and then now why it's really exploding. Now, of course, Bitcoin has bounced and the rest of the market is bouncing quite nicely currently. So if we're going back into a bull trend, that might kind of change a little bit the dynamics of the demand, such high demand for UST, but not necessarily. Luna, in a bull market, momentum and narrative means a lot. And so because Luna's been doing so well, there could just be a lot of people who are going to keep on jumping onto the bandwagon and really push the price even higher. And of course, also in the more macro sense, because of all this uncertainty that's emerging about stable coins, like Tether and some of those, like if there's going to be regulation that's going to maybe put a damper on those, there's a demand for having decentralized stable coins that can be used. And UST is kind of the leading one of those. And so it makes sense from that perspective also why Luna can do quite well. And of course, Luna has a lot of other utility beyond just UST. That just might be one thing that's especially been important during this more recent time. If you look at Luna in terms of just its total value locked on DeFi, it's also quite high. And we know that the market has been really valuing protocols that have a lot of value locked in DeFi or that have a lot of utility in that sector. So it also makes sense why Luna is doing quite well from that perspective as well. So if we look at where Luna is right now in terms of its risk level according to UDPI, we're not, as I mentioned before, we're not too far gone yet, right? We're not up at these really high risk zones, that Luna's kind of gotten rejected off of before. This kind of 4 to 5 range seems to be quite important in its history. We're still quite a bit away from that. But if Luna keeps kind of going parabolic and really jumping, we could get there before too long. That's not impossible. And there's nothing to say that we have to get up there, right? It could be that Luna will pump for a bit more, or maybe it's getting close to kind of its end and it'll get rejected from one of these lower risk levels. That's absolutely possible. Anytime you start getting up kind of above 1, approaching 2, you have to kind of become, well, not financial advice, but in my opinion, I always become a little bit more cautious when I see an asset start getting up here, because kind of the higher we get, the more risky it is, the more likely that they're going to be sellers who are going to come in and try to take profits. The less buyers are necessarily going to be jumping in at those higher prices. It just becomes a little bit more risky. And so that tends to be the dynamic that unfolds. And we'll just have to wait and see what happens, right? But certainly right now, in my personal opinion, Luna does not seem to be offering a particularly fantastic entry point, at least for for really massive upside potential. Given how far the market corrected, I personally think there are probably better risk reward ratios elsewhere. But not financial advice. Make your own decisions. If you think that Luna is going to pump, you do whatever you think is best. That's just my take. And the model says that this isn't necessarily the absolute worst time, but it's certainly not the best time either. So just to talk a little bit more about where we are right now. So the exact level that we are for Luna is a 1.61. So again, the upside potential is limited relative to the downside potential according to the model. There's kind of more room that's plausible for it to fall than there is for it to go up. But that doesn't mean it has to stop going up or it has to correct immediately. Luna could keep pumping for a while before it ends up tapping out. And really, I would be getting especially cautious if we were up in those kind of 3, 4, 5 levels of risk. That's when I get especially cautious. Here, I think there's a decent chance that Luna keeps going up, but the reality is likely to be that any further upside potential is probably going to be limited in the sense of multiples. So, the number of multiples it's going to be able to put in from here is probably limited relative to what some other assets might be able to do that have been sitting at quite a bit lower risk more recently. So again, not financial advice. You should make your own decisions, but just something that I'm thinking about right now. I personally don't see Luna as being all that attractive of an option. I think there are other ones that might be looking a little bit tastier. And I think we can see those if we just look at across the different assets that we're tracking here at Upside Down Data. So we're tracking 23 different assets and we're adding more every week. So follow the channel if you want to see those as they come out. And what you can see is that Luna is kind of a bit of an outlier right now in terms of its risk level, right? It's really Luna and AVAX that have been the two that have kind of been hanging out at higher levels of risk, even kind of throughout this correction. And everything else has been diving well down. Vast majority of these are in the negatives, a lot of them in the deep negatives. And so what I'm personally looking at is I think that anyone with a Luna position is certainly happy, but if one were to be taking profits off of Luna, again, up to you if you were actually going to do that, but if one were to do that, the benefit right now is that there's a ton of other options that sit here that offer quite favorable risk reward ratios. And if the market continues to rally, if Bitcoin's able to get above 53K and then keep pushing up higher and then pull the rest of the market up with it, I think we could see a lot of these assets really explode from here, because look at how low risk these are. We haven't seen levels like this since the summer, really, for a lot of these assets. This is exceptionally low levels of risk here. And we know what these assets were able to do coming out of the summer. There were some quite impressive moves. It's not unreasonable to think that if the market continues to rally, we could see some more impressive moves coming to the upside from these assets as well. And so assets that are like DOT, for example, that's at negative 4.68, Link at 4.04, Phantom negative 3.31. Phantom 1 is one I'm actually watching pretty closely right now just because of all the DeFi development that goes on it. That one, just to speculate, I think that one could do quite well if we get a market rally. That one could maybe potentially really pump. Who knows? Those kind of predictions are always a little bit questionable, but that's just one I'm watching at the moment. But you can just see across the space, there's tons of great opportunities, and even Bitcoin itself is at negative 1.2. And so it has a lot of room that it can start realizing if it starts pumping. And so this is, in my opinion, a pretty exciting time in the market, potentially. Obviously we'll have to wait and see. It's too early to call it right now that this is a guaranteed pump and that we're just going to go shooting off to all-time highs immediately. We'll have to just wait and see and make sure. But certainly things are looking up. Things are looking a heck of a lot better than they were looking just a few days ago in the market. Bitcoin, as I'm recording this, reclaimed 50K, reclaimed 51K. It kind of was bouncing around there. And so if it's able to keep moving, that's going to be great. And so, again, with Luna, a bit higher risks, not really offering as favorable risk reward. But, if one were to be taking profits off of Luna, it seems like there's plenty of great opportunities or great places that money could go to maybe compound further. Of course, that's all assuming that this bounce will continue, the rally will continue. But what's nice is that if the rally does continue, we have really reset risk across the board. We have kind of accrued a lot more upside potential we can work with now than we had before, which means that any kind of subsequent runs can potentially go a lot further and a lot higher than they could have if we had started to run again a few months ago, like instead of that correction. And that's one of the benefits that these kind of corrections can have, that as long as they're not actually leading into a bear market, as long as they're just a correction in the midst of a bull market, it kind of helps to reset things a little bit, flush out leverage, make sure that all the short-term holders who don't want to stay around will sell, kind of all the weak hands will sell, and then only the strong hands will stay. And then as new demand comes in, there's less supply to buy, and it can shoot the price up again. So I'll have to wait and see what happens, but I think this is a potentially exciting time, and it'll be interesting to watch what the market does from here and how the UDPI reacts. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. And remember, with the UDPI, we're all going to make it.